series, The F Word. And we've been talking all about a different kind of F word, and that is the word forgiveness. And I think that the idea of forgiveness, the word forgive, might be to a lot of people more offensive than that other F word. Because most people, when truly hurt or having hurt others, are quicker to react with you than I forgive you or forgive me. The truly offensive word here is forgiveness. Because when we've been hurt, it is not the natural reaction. When we've hurt others, we sometimes dig our heels in to what we've done rather than begging for forgiveness. And I think that while this is true, it is also causing prolonged pain where maybe pain could be healed. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. But as we talk about forgiveness, I want to make sure that we have a clear definition, a working definition that we're all operating from, because words matter. Words are important. And sometimes when we say certain words, different people have different ideas about what those words can mean. And so we need to clearly define them. And when I say forgiveness, when we're talking about forgiveness in this series, this F word, what we're talking about is this: the conscious process of relinquishing resentment with the goal of restoring relationship. Just two parts there. It's a process that has two big parts: relinquishing resentment and restoring relationship. And it is a process. Don't get me wrong. All of what we're talking about is going to take steps. It's going to take maybe multiple conversations, depending on what the hurt is. That process could look different ways, but it is a process. And so as we look into forgiveness, our series idea worth discussing, the big idea throughout this whole thing is this: forgiveness is a deeply spiritual act with profoundly physical results. While this is a divine, supernatural process, right? Forgiveness, it is spiritual. It touches on every aspect of our life. It is also, while it is spiritual, it is also practical. And it has profound results on the way we live our life day to day. And that's why forgiveness is so important. Then we said last week that forgiveness isn't just a good idea, it's a God idea. Well, why? Well, because God doesn't just leave broken things broken. God is about healing what is broken rather than just disposing of it. And just like our relationships can be broken through hurt and pain, hurt that we've caused or hurt that's been caused to us, when we make the effort to make amends, when we begin to repair those, that is a godly thing, which leads us to our idea worth discussing this week. Here's what we're going to talk about. Making the effort to make amends makes us more like God. You see, this is all a God thing, a God idea, this idea of forgiveness and enacting this. And I'm going to show you why and how and what this means and where we can get from that today. But I want us to understand that making amends, not just relinquishing the resentment, but going in to repair what was broken. Not just shrugging it off, not saying I'm not going to hold on to resentment anymore. That's a good step in the process. But actually repairing what is broken from one side or the other is incredibly difficult, but it is so important. Latasha Morrison, in her book, Be the Bridge, I highly recommend this. It's a book on racial reconciliation. It says this: repairing what's broken is a distinctly biblical concept, which is why as people of faith, we should be leading the way into redemption, restoration, and reconciliation. All of us, we should be following Jesus in that path, the path that Jesus took to redeem and restore the world. Now, one thing, and we've talked about this before, One thing that God uses, and use if you look into the Bible, you can hardly get through the Bible without recognizing this truth, is that God uses families. He uses broken families. He uses messy families to demonstrate, to be a picture of redemption and restoration. And I would venture to say that most of us, our hurt, the areas where we need to forgive and we need to be forgiven, primarily come with our family. We all got that family of origin stuff that we carry around. That past, that thing that was broken then, that we've carried with us in our brokenness. And maybe we no longer harbor resentment. We've let go of the resentment. But where have we repaired what was broken? And that's what I want to talk about today. God uses these families to tell the story of redemption and restoration. So we're going to look into the Jewish scriptures, into Genesis, which means the beginning. We're going to go way back, and we're going to look at a story of some people, some real people with real family stuff. And we're going to look at how they make amends and our connection to God in that. So, I want to tell the story of Jacob and Esau. Maybe you're familiar with it. If you're not, I want to kind of give you some background. So, many of you probably understand in the Jewish history, there's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These were the three patriarchs of the family, the beginning of this family, which would become a nation, the nation of Israel. And so there was Abraham, who was called out and separated by God, and God said, I'm going to make you a great nation. And he had one son. His name was Isaac, and he had this son with his wife with his wife Sarah. They had Isaac, and then Isaac has two sons, Esau and Jacob. They're twins. Esau was born first, just before Jacob. And so, even though they're twins, the way that it would go is that the birthright, the legacy, the bulk of the inheritance would go to the firstborn. But God had promised that the secondborn would actually be the one that would inherit the birthright. The one that he would make the great nation of Israel out of. Jacob's name actually is changed to Israel. In his story and in his journey, he moves from Jacob to Israel. Jacob meaning supplanter or deceiver, to Israel having this completely different redemptive meaning. And so Jacob, being the secondborn, wasn't going to get the birthright, but believed it had been promised to him by God. And one day Esau, who was really an outdoorsy guy, and Jacob was kind of a more indoorsy guy, Esau was out hunting. He was famished coming back from hunting. He finally had a kill, and he begs Jacob to make him something to eat with what he just killed. And he's like, I'm to the point I'm going to die. I'm so hungry. And Jacob says, I'll make you something, but you got to sell me your birthright for this bowl of stew. And Esau agrees. Pretty foolish thing to do, to sell your entire inheritance for a bowl of stew. He was probably pretty hungry and not thinking clearly. Now, there's no way their father, Isaac, would go for this. So when he's old and getting ready to pass down the inheritance to Esau, Jacob and his mom actually figure out a way to trick this old man who cannot see well and cannot hear well, and he's going to do this ceremony to pass on the bulk of his inheritance to Esau. But they trick him, and they make Jacob appear to be Esau, and Isaac gives the birthright to the second son. It's done. He can't fix it. Even when he realizes what happened, he cannot fix it. It is now Jacob's. He has essentially stolen, deceived, tricked people into getting this birthright, this legacy. And his father was growing in wealth, and this was a big deal. So Jacob leaves, the story continues. He actually deceives his father-in-law, and his father-in-law deceives him, and it's a real story of just some messiness. When you look at Jacob, he finds this woman, he falls in love, he wants to marry her, and his father-in-law tricks him into marrying the older daughter, and even consummating that marriage with the older daughter, who wasn't as pretty. He wasn't in love with her, and so he worked 7 years to marry her, and so now he works another 7 years to marry the younger daughter, and he has all these kids by the older daughter, and he has one son, Joseph, which is a pretty special story, and we've talked about that before with this other daughter. And we're going to see that his life is messy because of his choices, his decisions to deceive people. But we also then see this encounter with God as he's running from his father-in-law. He has this encounter with God where he wrestles with God. And where he's traveling as he's running from his father-in-law, he knows he's going to have to go through a city that his brother, who he hasn't seen in years, the last time he saw him, he tricked him. He stole something that was rightfully his. And we're going to see he's going to have to go through where his brother is now, the city where his brother is in charge. His brother has increased in wealth and in status. And as Jacob is planning to go through this, he sets his family up, and he sets people up to protect him, and he sends gifts ahead of him. He sends gifts of all kinds of flocks and fine things that he can send ahead of him. And we're going to pick up this story where he and his brother are coming to each other. And here's what it says. It says, "Then Jacob went on ahead. As he approached his brother, he bowed to the ground 7 times before him." Now, this wasn't specifically unusual. This would have been an act that anyone would have seen towards someone who they viewed or deemed as superior, right? And so this was really a very humbling act. And so we see him bow to the ground. So he would have walked a bit, bowed to the ground for Esau to see. He would have stood up. He would have walked again. He would have bowed to the ground. He would have done this 7 times until he was there, bowing in the ground in front of this person. It says, then Esau, when he saw his brother bowing to the ground, he ran to meet him and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and he kissed him, and they both wept. Jacob was terrified of the reaction of his brother, and his brother's reaction was to run to him and to kiss him, and they both wept. And it teaches us something about making amends, that making amends means demonstrating guilt acknowledgement. Jacob bowed in humility to his older brother. This again wasn't unusual, but I think it was incredibly important to see, because he was acknowledging him as superior, but also attempting to make peace where it had been broken. He was humbling himself. Now, maybe there was a bit of self-preservation in this, right? He didn't want to go to war. He didn't want to have to fight his brother. What do they say? The bullet flies over him that stoops, right? So maybe there was some self-preservation in this. But either way, he was acknowledging his brother, and he was acknowledging his wrongness. He was doing this by bending down and humbling himself, demonstrating guilt. He was acknowledging, I was guilty. I stole something that wasn't mine. I lied. I deceived. I get it now. My father-in-law did it to me. I get what it feels like now. I should have done that. And we see that the years have gone by, and we see him acknowledge his guilt, but we also see his brother run to him as if things are different than what Jacob even imagined when he went to make amends. If you're going to make amends, you got to start with acknowledging the guilt that's there. In his book, No Future Without Forgiveness, we've been looking at this as in South Africa, and Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and how they went through this process to restore their country. And one of the things that they granted forgiveness to those who would come before the council and acknowledge their guilt. And they could acknowledge their guilt because they knew they would be forgiven if they did so. And it was an incredibly powerful act of forgiveness, but also an incredibly powerful act to say, listen, we're not going to sweep it under the rug. We're going to acknowledge the truth. And the guilt can come out onto the table. We can release that. We can demonstrate our acknowledgement of our guilt. But he continues. So Jacob had offered the gifts, and Esau's like, I don't need those. And it says, but Jacob insisted. He says, no, if I have found favor with you, please accept this gift from me. And what a relief to see your friendly smile. I love this next sentence. It is like seeing the face of God. The idea that this guilty person would look on the person with which they have offended, with which they have deceived, and see a smile. He said it's like seeing the face of God. Why? Well, because forgiveness is a God thing, right? It's not just a good idea, it's a God idea. And he said, listen, when I see your smile, what I know is I'm forgiven. And it's like seeing the face of God. Please take this gift I have brought you. For God has been very gracious to me. I have more than enough. And because Jacob insisted, Esau finally accepted the gift. And I think we see this next step in what it means to actually truly make amends. And that is accepting an authentic apology. Has someone ever tried to make something right with you and you just didn't believe them and you didn't accept their apology? Or maybe you weren't in a place emotionally. They apologized. They even demonstrated that they were guilty. They apologized and you just went, no, thank you. No, part of making amends, part of repairing what is broken, part of restoring relationship is saying, I'm seeing that you're demonstrating that you're guilty and you understand that. And I'm going to accept that apology. I'm going to pretend as if what you're saying is true and that it's over with. I was listening to an interview with a celebrity recently. He was talking about his family, and his family was very interesting. But one of the things he said that his father showed him and demonstrated to him was that if something was wrong and someone was really in trouble and something had happened, they would hash it out as a family. And it was those nights where they got to go to the special place and get the special meal and stay up late and miss school the next day. And if you ever brought it up again, you were in more trouble. Why? Well, because we're making amends, and this is all an act of making amends, and then it is over. We don't bring it back up anymore. I accept your apology. You demonstrated guilt. I accept your apology. And then look at what it says. This is so important. Sometimes we can miss these small things, but look at what it says in Genesis 33:12. It says, well, Esau said, let's be going. I will lead the way. Look at the word, let us, together. Let's go in the same direction together. Leads us to our next thing. Making amends means restoring relational expectation. For Esau, there was an expectation of, we are now going to go in the same direction together. They didn't end up doing that. Jacob had another place to go. But the idea with Esau is, this is forgiving, this is done, this has been repaired. You've acknowledged your guilt. I accept your apology, and I accept the gift that comes along with it. Now listen, I'm sure that what Jacob gave Esau as a gift to make amends, to repair what was broken, was not equal to what he stole from his brother. Maybe it was more symbolic than substantive. But what we see is, along with him apologizing came this gift to repair what was stolen. And then from there was this expectation of relationship. Let us go together. I'll lead the way. We're in this together. We're bonded. We're back together. Imagine that person, that family member that you need to forgive or needs to forgive you. Imagine that with that person that you can actually expect that you have a relationship again because you've made amends. Because there's been an acknowledgement of guilt. There's been a genuine, authentic apology. And then there's now this relational expectation that we are going to move in the same direction. That's what it means to make amends. That's what it means to repair what has been broken. Look what Desmond Tutu says of Nelson Mandela. He said, speaking of Mandela, as the president, invited his white jailer to attend his inauguration as an honored guest, the first of many gestures he would make in his spectacular way, showing his breathtaking magnanimity and willingness to forgive. This person who had probably beaten him, this person who had been there while he was there for almost 30 years, who had probably spewed hate to him, when he got into power, he invited him to be an honored guest at the inauguration. This act demonstrated to an entire nation that forgiveness was possible and that power didn't have to be accompanied by vengeance. He demonstrated to everyone, if we're truly going to make amends, if we're truly going to move forward and have a future as a country, it is not vengeance that gets us there. He was in power now. He could have incited vengeance, and instead he incited forgiveness. And he demonstrated this with these kinds of acts. It demonstrated what he wanted for his entire country, for all of South Africa, and that was reconciliation. He wanted them to truly make amends, to repair what was broken and to move forward in relationship. And making the effort to make amends makes us more like God. Those who follow Jesus, maybe you're with us today because you follow Jesus. It may not be everybody, but maybe you're here because you do follow Jesus and you want to have these Jesus-centered conversations. Well, those who follow Jesus believe that his very existence was proof that God forgives, God loves, and that we can be reconciled to God. That we are forgiven. That Jesus, not just his teachings, but his very existence, this God in the flesh, this incarnation, God with a bod, walking the earth, showing people that his followers are like, we thought we knew what God was like from reading the law and the prophets. And then we saw Jesus, and we know what God is really like. And what was God like? God was forgiving. God was initiating forgiveness. He was initiating reconciliation. He was initiating this restoration of relationship. And when people use that word gospel, this good news that saves us, that's what it is. It's good news that we are forgiven. That God says, listen, I know that humanity has broken its relationship with me, and I'm going to pursue them anyways in love and forgiveness and in relational restoration. And this universal is also the personal. Right? This thing that is for all humanity, that God is doing, that is redeeming and restoring everything that is universal is also personal. Where God is redeeming and restoring his relationship with you as an individual. And also, we can redeem and restore the relationship with the people around us. And that we should even initiate that. Because making the effort to make amends makes us more like God.